Thomas is going to be giving us a paper called Confronting Conspiracy Theories in the Era of COVID-19, a novel phenomenological approach. Thomas, please take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to thank the organizers. And yeah, no, I'm really excited to be here. So I will first preface this by saying that I am approaching this from a very different angle than the rest of the talks that I've heard so far today. As should be evident from the title, I am a continental philosopher. So despite being an American, I have my training from the Husserl archives in Leuven, Belgium. And so I will be presenting largely a phenomenological approach to understanding conspiracy theories in abstraction from more analytic considerations of it. Moreover, by way of introduction, I do have an introduction, but I'm kind of going off of what I've seen is that a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of philosophies about conspiracy theories are trying to address conspiracy theories as they arise today. My project and my presentation take a different approach and trace the historical lineage which has led to many conspiracy theories. So I'm going to be tracing back specifically conspiracy theories regarding science all the way to Galileo to demonstrate how these specific kinds of conspiracy theories can be understood only, or no, not only, but it can be more understood once we take into account the last several hundred years of societal and historical development of the sciences. So with that said, I will begin the paper more properly. So I would say, amidst the rise of the novel coronavirus pandemic, governments around the world have set in place different public health measures, including stay-at-home orders, lockdowns, and quarantines. While these measures were, at least initially, implemented based on the best scientific understanding available, arguments, protests, and ultimately conspiracy theories arose in response to these restrictions in different parts of the world. My paper seeks to demonstrate why, for many people, the presentation of scientific results cannot help persuade them away from believing in these conspiracy theories. In doing so, I seek to show how the prevalence of these conspiracy theories, in part, is the result of much larger societal and historical problems. By drawing from the resources of Edmund Husserl's Phenomenology, I argued that the factical historical development of the sciences has led everyday individuals to feel alienated from the results of the sciences, where this has set the conditions for dissent, as has been manifested in the rise of recent conspiracy theories. In other words, I am showing how the evolution of the sciences sets up the condition for conspiracy theories to be incalcitrant to scientific reasoning. To accomplish this goal, this paper is divided into three sections. First, the paper historically traces the crisis of the sciences, which inspired protests and conspiracy theories all the way back to Galileo's formulation of the sciences. I show that Galileo began a style of thinking which created a divide between the world of science and the everyday world we live in, the life world. Second, I outline how this gap between the life world and the world of science, which has widened over the historical development of the sciences, has made it such that scientific results are not perceived as relevant to some individuals, such that scientific results hold no sway in helping to convince conspiracy theorists to stop believing in conspiracy theories. In the conclusion, I make a critical clarification. I highlight that while I am identifying the conditions that often lead to incalcitrant conspiracy theories, I am naturally not endorsing such dissent. Here in the introduction, I also note that my account does not attempt to provide a sufficient or even necessary attempts to explain why conspiracy theories are arised and maintained. Rather, I seek to shed some light on one of the possible contributing factors. So first, the history of the crisis of the sciences. Before proceeding, a quick methodological clarification on Husserl's analysis of Galileo. Husserl does not put forward a strict historical treatment if this is understood to mean a factual study of the life and times of Galileo Galilei. As Husserl notes, all merely factual history remains incomprehensible because always merely drawing its conclusions naively and straightforwardly from facts, it never makes thematic the general ground of meaning upon which all such conclusions rest. A factual analysis of history would focus on certain events and figures. However, it is never clear why these moments, as opposed to others, are worthy of clarifying our attention. In contrast, Husserl's treatment undertakes the task of clarifying history by inquiring back into the primal establishment of the goals which bind together the chain of future generations. In other words, Husserl's analysis of history concerns how certain events are meaningful and continue to influence the attitudes of successive generations. In this regard, Husserl's analysis is not a factual study of the historical Galileo, but is better understood as a treatment of Galileo's legacy that continues to influence and be meaningful to those inside and outside of the scientific community. Now to the matter at hand. Although an inherently complicated episode in the history of science, the tension between Galileo and the Catholic Church continues to be meaningfully associated with the rise of scientific authority in the West and its claims to objective truth. It inaugurated a certain style of thinking that, as Aaron Gershwitz notes, posits, quote, a cleavage between the world as it presents itself in the perceptual experience of everyday life and the world as it is in scientific truth. Now, according to Husserl, this cleavage was the indirect result of scientific investigations that employed specific methods and techniques. In this section, I follow Husserl's attempt to clarify these methods and techniques. Crucial to this clarification is shedding light on the differences between ideal objects of geometry and the perceptual objects in everyday experience or the life world. First, concerning ideal geometrical shapes, they are pure shapes which can be drawn in ideal space, pure bodies, and straight lines. They do not vary or change over time. Moreover, pure geometrical objects are never found in our lived experience. We never perceive an ideal straight line, an ideal triangle, or an ideal sphere. In contrast, perceived objects of the life world are immediately given to and around us. For example, trees, coastlines, rocks, cars, and so on. Their immediate properties can vary and change over time, or rather do vary and change over time. Now, in its search for objective knowledge, Galilean science aims to transition from the varying character of perceptual experience to invariant truths. This is achieved by executing the technique or method of idealization, which repeatedly perfects indeterminate and varying aspects of perceptual objects to attain ideal geometrical figures. For instance, the roughly straight line in perceptual experience is constantly perfected to attain an invariant and never attainable pole of the most ideal form of straightness. Another helpful example pictured here is of surveying. This is an example that Husserl and many other continentals use. Now, let's say a surveyor had to measure the length of a coastline for taxation purposes, for example. Naturally, a coastline continues to shift and change and always will. However, the surveyor has to idealize this shifting coastline to arrive at the invariant and never attainable pole of the straight and measurable coastline, which does not exist and which no one will ever experience. Now, for Husserl, the technique of idealization reduces the inexact features of a perceptual object or its secondary qualities to its primary qualities. As we know, the former secondary qualities refer to qualities like color that ostensibly, but don't actually, pertain to the subject's relation to the object. the subject's perception of color can fluctuate depending upon various contextual factors, for example, visibility conditions. Conversely, primary qualities are purportedly mathematizable and understood to inhere in the object independent of a subject's relation to it. In the case of color, the corresponding primary quality would be wavelength. Given that primary qualities can be calculated in an exact manner, unlike secondary qualities, color is reduced to wavelength for the purposes of precise measurement. Therefore, via the process of idealization, one can execute an indirect mathematization of secondary qualities in terms of primary qualities. Yet, by subsuming all perceptual features of the sensible world under mathematizable primary qualities, secondary qualities eventually attain a reduced status. As the historical Galileo notes, tastes, odors, colors, etc., are nothing but empty names. They inhere only in the sensitive body, such that if one removes the animal, then all these qualities are taken away and annihilated. However, this accomplishment has its limitations. As previously mentioned, only mathematizable primary qualities qualify the criteria set by Galilean science. This would imply that the mathematizability of a quality is the measure of its reality. What Galilean science sets out to achieve is to extend this insight from the qualities of individual objects to the concrete world as such. This eventually leads to a complete mathematization of reality, where the objective aspects of nature are taken to be those that are mathematical. As Husserl notes, mathematics and mathematical sciences, as a garb of ideas, encompass everything which, for scientists and the educated generally, represents the life world, dresses it up as objectively actual and true nature. It is through the garb of ideas that we take for true being what is actually a method. Consequently, Husserl writes that through Galileo's mathematization of nature, nature itself is idealized, and under the guidance of the new mathematics, nature itself becomes, to express it in a modern way, a mathematical manifold. In other words, nature becomes a mathematical domain, thereby excluding unmathematizable features of objective experience. What directs Husserl's criticism is the privileging of mathematizable qualities over secondary qualities. In other words, Husserl is critical of granting mathematizable qualities the status of objective reality while reducing secondary qualities, and by extension, the common sense world and experience, to the status of empty name. Now, this relegates subjective experience of the world to a mere opinion, prejudice, or subjective appearance. As Gary Guting notes, quote, any scientific description of the world is essentially incomplete in that it inevitably omits major dimensions of our life world experience. A famous instantiation of this is the physicist Arthur Eddington's distinction between two tables. The first table, or commonplace table, refers to the substantial perceptual object that is part of our daily activities in the life world. The second table, the scientific table, differs in that it is not given to the senses and consists mostly of emptiness scattered with electrical charges. Eddington sees the scientific table as objectively real, while the commonplace table gets relegated to the status of mere subjective appearance. This represents the substitution where the scientific table claims the status of objective reality, and this leaves no legitimate place for the commonplace table of the life world. Now, when a subject's concrete way of engaging with objects, such as tables, are eschewed from scientific reality, it becomes unclear what the subject is dealing with when they are interacting with the commonplace table. This has a double effect. First, the domain of scientific reality can become enigmatic when it diverges from everyday experience. And second, as Richard Tyson notes, following Husserl, this could lead to a form of alienation from reality for the subject when her everyday experience is not taken as part of objective reality. So I'll read that one more time. When a subject's concrete way of engaging with objects, such as tables, are eschewed from scientific reality, it becomes unclear what the subject is dealing with when interacting with the commonplace table. This has a double effect. First, the domain of scientific reality can become enigmatic when it diverges from everyday experience. Second, as Richard Tyson notes following Husserl, this could lead to a form of alienation from reality for the subject when her everyday experience is not taken as a part of objective reality. Now, section 2, COVID-19 conspiracies. This will be applying all of this historical analysis now to these specific conspiracy theories. Although much of the discussion in Husserl's writings pertain to mathematical physics, there are broad similarities between Husserl's conception of Galilean science and public health. First, Galilean objectivity concerns itself with being valid for all and not just for specific individuals or groups. Second, a core feature of Husserl's analysis is the application of abstract mathematics to the empirical domain and the problems of such application when carried out uncritically. Now, public health exhibits a similar tendency on both points. As Dean Rickles writes, public health concerns the health of populations of people rather than individual people, as in the case of clinical medicine or biomedicine. It deals with aggregates of measurements of properties of individuals and is therefore a statistical science facing the many technological, epistemological, and metaphysical problems that this inevitably involves. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has become a perfect case study for the implications that follow from attempting to motivate collective action without being able to speak to the communities that are meant to take action, especially when expert recommendations are perceived as being insensitive to immediate economic stresses or challenging closely held lifestyle choices. In light of this, the health threat of SARS-CoV-2 can become enigmatic to those overwhelmed by economic, social, political, and personal crises. In these contexts, Husserl articulates the public perception of science by writing, "In our vital need, so we are told, this science has nothing to say to us. It excludes, in principle, precisely the question which man, given over in our unhappy times to the most portentous upheavals, finds the most burning." During the unhappy times of the COVID-19 pandemic and its most portentous upheavals, at least initially, well-intentioned and necessary scientific results and public health recommendations can seem alienating. Now, as noted previously, there is the tendency for scientific objectivity to perform a substitution where its conception of reality is taken to be the whole, one that relegates differing experiences to the status of mere opinion, bias, or prejudice. And if the scientific reality in question is enigmatic to everyday experience, this can be alienating for the public. Such a context comprises the ability to build trust, specifically trust to motivate public action. When this is followed by attempts to mobilize action that is perceived to be against self-interest of the members of the public, the conditions for dissent and even incalcitrant conspiracy theories emerges. Epidemiologist Jeffrey Rose notes that, quote, "A preventative measure that brings large benefits to the community offers little to each participating individual," end note. Preventative strategies like lockdowns and social distancing measures are undeniably effective in limiting the spread of disease at the community and population level. At the same time, control measures have drastic economic, social, psychological, and political ramifications for individuals or groups in a population. Control measures can only be effective when most of the individuals in the population are willing to change their social behavior. Here we see a repetition of themes discussed previously. In the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, the devastating health risks of SARS-CoV-2 have become enigmatic amidst a variety of economic, social, political, and personal crises. Consequently, complying with control measures can become alienating when they are insensitive to the stark lived realities of individuals. Following Husserl, this compromises validity and shifts the expert-public relationship away from building trust required to motivate compliance. This sets the conditions for dissent against COVID-19 restrictions and sets up the place for conspiracy theories to emerge. Now, as has been foreshadowed, because science appears irrelevant to and totally separate from the life world in which everyday people live, any appeal to scientific results has no influence on conspiracy theorists. Instead, individuals who follow conspiracy theories regarding COVID-19 rely on data that they can see in the life world. They reject counterintuitive claims that have been arrived at via the scientific method, and in contrast, adopt positions that appear self-evident from the perspective of the everyday individual in the life world. They look around at the world, they look around at the world and they see if some enigmatic and alienating scientific fact contradicts their own experience, the scientific fact, which is again alienating and enigmatic, must be wrong and not their own experience of the life world. For some really simple examples, which are also quite funny to provide concrete cases of this, I have grabbed some memes that I've seen myself very frequently on Facebook. So here is one of them, which again, silly, but I've seen it all over the place. I mean, this meme works so well and is posted so often because it appeals to direct experience in the life world. Simply, if pants can't stop the smell of farts, what would make it the case that the mask could stop a very small virus? Indeed, the conclusion is very intuitive and based on the experience in the life world, although obviously false. Any appeal to scientific facts and experiments here would have no impact. And those who believe this kind of idea, primarily because they have become estranged from the sciences, will not accept scientific results. Another prominent meme is the following. Again, I don't know if you've seen this on Facebook or on Instagram, but I've seen it all over the place. And again, the idea appeals to simple intuition without any real consideration of the situation or the science. Naturally, because it is so simple and intuitive, for those who are estranged from the sciences, basic scientific objections aren't even considered, and when considered, they aren't seen to be good objections. The individual who finds scientific results to be estranging and alienating can no longer be reached by simple scientific discoveries. While all of this historical and philosophical information is important, my point boils down to something very simple in the end. Because of the way that the sciences have developed, the results of the sciences often cannot speak to or motivate or change beliefs. Rather, because of the cleavage between the world of science and the life world has arisen, individuals instead adopt views which appear intuitive to them in the life world. Now, to state this once more, I am not claiming that the sciences speak a different language from the one employed in the life world. Indeed, the sciences could, so to speak, be translated into simple speak, and this would not change the situation at all. Rather, science must again be positioned correctly within the life world. There has to be a shift in how we think about the sciences, not as the highest arbiter of truth, or rather the highest arbiter of some other truth, which is not the truth of this world, but rather we have to think of science as another cultural activity amongst others. Indeed, there is potential in Husserl's Phenomenology to articulate a positive account of scientific objectivity with the required intersubjective validity in the life world to motivate public action. In the Vienna lectures, Husserl makes clear his intention to use phenomenology to bring about a total reorientation of the task of knowledge towards a new sort of praxis that is capable of transforming humanity from the bottom up. However, elaborating on this potential is outside of the ambit of the present paper, which focuses on the specific conditions under which incalcitrant conspiracy theories can arise. Now for a very brief conclusion, the paper presented a preliminary step in extending the political potential of Husserl's phenomenology of science to crises that explicitly bring together science and politics. I focused on demonstrating why the mobilization of scientific objectivity is unable to convince conspiracy theorists to change their views, as often is the case. Rather, a call to observe the objectivity of science will instead, in the historical and societal conditions we find ourselves, accelerate the rate of these conspiracy theories. So long as science is not just taken as another cultural practice, the results will continue to motivate dissent rather than compliance. Husserl's crisis of the sciences is instantiated in a pandemic that does not effectively speak to the issues the public finds most burning during these unhappy times of portentous upheavals. Instead of motivating acceptance, the invoking of scientific objectivity sets the conditions for dissent when scientific public health perspective is substituted for the various specific ways of relating to COVID-19 in the life world. Now, this is not to deny my immense gratitude to the many public health experts, healthcare professionals, policymakers, and volunteers who have worked tirelessly to keep us safe during this time. Instead, following Husserl's treatment of Galilean science, I hope to have shown that uncritically extending the notion of scientific objectivity to invoke compliance with public health recommendations can in fact result in its opposite of dissent. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. As we wait for the questions to come in, I've got what is either a minor or major historical point. So when you talk about Galilean science and conspiracy theories, it makes me think of a very specific set of extreme Catholic conspiracy theories, which goes under the motto Galileo was wrong. So it's the geocentrists who to this day still have conferences explaining exactly where Galileo went wrong and generating vast amounts what appears to be evidence to show that Galileo was completely wrong and actually the Earth really is at the center of the universe, or sorry, the system as we know it.
Yes. Well, sorry, I would say that, yeah, in a certain sense, this is taking the, this is going back to the heart of the problem in a certain sense, and that they have identified where the problem started, and in many senses, I think that this is, for a lot of people, an entry point into conspiracy theories. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the transition from flat earthers to QAnon, for example, but that pretty much everyone who was a flat earther has now also become a QAnon conspiracy theorist in many ways. Also, how do I stop sharing my screen? I can't figure it out.
There should be at the very top of your screen. There should be an option for stopping share.
Ah, okay. Yep, there we are.
Yeah,
okay.
There we go. Fantastic. Yes. All right, now, if there are any questions from the audience? Oh, here we go. Kurt Hanks. Why do people have such trouble understanding partial projection? E.g., when they hear that the vaccine doesn't offer 100% protection and conclude then it is completely useless? I realize you're not an epidemiologist, so you may not be able to give a fully qualified answer on this one.
I mean, I think it is interesting why people are concerned with the safety of the vaccine. I mean, in a certain sense, the use of vaccines is itself a very counterintuitive practice, in that giving yourself the mRNA of the virus inside of a small vial can somehow protect you from that which is spreading all over the place. And in a certain sense, I could say that people are perhaps hesitant to take the vaccine because they either don't believe the scientific evidence, or they're willing to cherry pick examples of people who have had really bad experiences, or cherry pick examples of people who have gotten COVID-19 despite having taken the vaccine, where here these examples from the life world, from their everyday experience, is much more easy and can be clearly grasped, in contrast to the research that goes behind the mRNA vaccines. And in a certain sense, the latter is also, as has been established over time, more alienating and enigmatic to individuals, where it seems as if those scientific results can't speak to their own experiences. So that's how I would answer that.
Okay, we've actually got two Daniels asking questions now. So we'll start with the first. Well, I'm not the first as in the most important, but the first Daniel to ask. Daniel
Yes.
Barber is a very interesting talk. It seems to me, anyways, that COVID denialism doesn't always return to what we see. All too often, they seem to do quite the opposite. For example, even if all their family experiences COVID firsthand, the denialists will probably say that it's anything but COVID, denying their own experiences. There might be better examples. How would your idea fit with that?
Yes, so I guess I should say before anything else, I'm not saying that COVID denialism always returns to this. I would say that this provides a contributing factor, and not just a contributing factor to, for example, COVID, but also to many doubts about science, for example, also climate change. And I mean, yeah, also to return to flat eartherism, in many senses, yeah, I can understand why people do believe this. It seems much more intuitive when you look out at the horizon to see that the horizon is flat, and rather than accepting the scientific evidence or even photos from space, because their own experience of the ocean is such that they see it as flat, they're willing to accept that, in contrast to scientific results, which seem much more alienating and don't really appear to speak to their own experiences. So I guess I would say first, it's not the case that it always returns to that, and that there are many other contributing factors that are involved here, and that I'm just trying to highlight one part of the very complex web that is going on when we're talking about conspiracy theories.
Right, we've got the other Daniel raises an interesting concern/question. My concern is that the dichotomy between the world of science and the world of life is proving illusory, because amongst those who are skeptical of pandemic management are scientists.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, I would say that this could be the result of compartmentalization, where the work that they are doing in the lab somehow doesn't apply to the real world. I mean, yeah, there are geologists who are young Earth creationists, you know, these kinds of people who would totally compartmentalize their academic work, or who try to bend their own academic work or research to the experience that they find to be the most intuitive. Yeah, I mean, it is also the case that there may be also, again, contributing factors that are beyond this this model that are responsible for these kinds of specific examples. But I do think that it would be really interesting to look more at this, because this is not something that I have myself examined. So thank you for the question. I think it can motivate really good future research.
And right, we've got a question from Rico here. You're certainly right about certain variants of skepticism or reluctance towards science, but I think we should be aware that a critical attitude towards science or certain scientific procedures or results can sometimes also be justified from within a scientific worldview. That is, from a commitment to the scientific method. Consider the critique of collective bias in science, feminist critique of science, critique of entanglement of business, economics, and research, etc., etc.
I would say, yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes, certainly that there are different ways to arrive at conspiracy theories, and that there are individuals who do attempt from within a scientific worldview to create conspiracy theories. I mean, a good example of this is in America we have this guy Ken Ham, who runs a young Earth creationist museum. And the motto of the museum is same data, different interpretations, trying to say that he is looking at the same evidence that other scientists are looking at, but that it can somehow be interpreted in a different way. So yeah, I would say that there are some individuals who will try to employ the language of science and try to twist the language of science to make these conspiracy theories. Again, coming back to the same answer, it's the case that I'm not trying to explain all different ways people arrive at conspiracy theories, but that this is certainly a contributing factor where yeah, and I mean, so now I'm thinking, I mean, like, for example, the Museum of the Youngest Creationists is also built in a way that it's supposed to be very intuitive to the individual. So it's supposed to take what they conceive of as science and bring it down to the level of the layperson in a way that maybe other museums don't, in a way that is very easy for pretty much anyone who goes in to understand what he's trying to do. And he tries to make it as very intuitive as possible. So unfortunately, I haven't been, but I've seen many videos from it, but I really would like to visit at least some point in time in the future. Anyway, that's my answer to the question.
And our final question comes from Nikki, who asks, very interesting talk, thanks. Do you see connections between alienation and perceived lack of control?
I mean, I would say that in a certain sense, it's the case that, yeah, scientific results are also executed by scientists who exist somewhere else. They are generally by the public. Scientists are not conceived as members among us, but rather as experts who examine this other Hinterwelt, this other world behind our world, and who are not engaged in any way with common day-to-day lives, and that somehow they are in control of what is being said and what's going on. And in contrast, the individuals of everyday life are just being dictated to and being told what to do rather than in any way involved. There's a really good example of this with I mean, the now famous Dr. Fauci during the AIDS crisis, where he suggested often that the homosexuals who were getting AIDS should have no input in who gets tested and which medicines are being tested. And I mean, this led to really catastrophic deaths, where, I mean, in a certain sense, this did help resolve certain things. But I think still with COVID, you can see it being perpetrated again, where it feels as if the doctors and the public health experts are speaking down to us rather than trying to show us why these things are important and speak to individuals in the life world if such a thing were possible, which I still don't know. But the answer to the question is yes. I would say that there is certainly a connection between perceived lack of control and this kind of alienation and the enigmatic results of the sciences. So thank you so much for your questions, by the way. I'm surprised at how many there are, and I hope that I can go through them and answer them. So thank you very much.